Welcome back to the channel. The ACIP has ruled, they've convened, and they've looked at the new booster, the bivalent booster, which is the original Wuhan ancestral strain, and BA4 and 5. And they have concluded that anyone who is sufficiently out, which they call at least 2 months from your last booster, your primary vaccination series, is recommended to get this new booster shot. And for Pfizer, it's 12 and up. Moderna, it's 18 and up. They have a one-size-fits-all policy. I'm here to talk to you about it today on the channel. I got an email from someone who is an expert in these issues, expert in vaccine science, and this is what they write. I need to vent that this Omicron booster approval is a shit show. I'm disheartened that they went with a one-size-fits-all policy. And I have to agree with this person. I mean, that's really the bottom line takeaway message. Why? I mean, where to get started? A lot of the data that was presented at the Immunization Practices Committee meeting was about a different vaccine that was a bivalent vaccine, but not all bivalent vaccines are the same. This was against the original Wuhan strain and the Omicron BA1. The data that is really used to support the Wuhan BA4-5 approval, which is the thing that came to market, is really mostly laboratory immunogenicity data and not human experience. So there's a lot we don't know. The panelists talked about many things, but one point that they make is that we need a one-size-fits-all policy because we need our messaging to be simple. I'm sorry, as a general rule in biomedicine, you should have as simple messaging as possible, but not at the point where the simplicity compromises patient care. Not at the point where the simplicity compromises doing the right thing for the person in front of you. That's why we give blood pressure medicines, but out of simplicity, we don't give it to people who have normal blood pressure until they faint. We acknowledge that these people don't need it, and all these people need it, and some people need it more. We have statin medications, but again, out of simplicity, we don't just put it in the water supply. We figure out who's at higher cardiovascular risk and we give it. We have chemotherapy, but out of simplicity, we don't just give everybody chemotherapy. We give people with the appropriate types of cancer chemotherapy. And similarly, you can, out of simplicity, do a few things a little bit different, but it doesn't justify this action. Now, what are the key areas of contention here? One, I think we can debate what is the level of evidence needed to bring a yearly or semi-yearly vaccine product to the market. But I think we have to acknowledge that that level of evidence might be different for a 90-year-old nursing home dwelling patient and a 20-year-old college athlete. That maybe the person who has much higher risk of bad outcomes from a respiratory virus, you might be willing to tolerate more uncertainty in that person than a younger, healthier person who has a much lower risk of bad outcomes from a respiratory virus. And so one can imagine that you could have had an EUA authorization just restricted to people above some age. And, I'm spitballing here, but maybe 75, or maybe people 75 and or dwelling in a nursing home and or immunocompromised. That's a vague category, and I know it's vague, but it will give a little bit of flexibility and allow doctors to make the right choice. That could be a reasonable category for an emergency use authorization. But for most middle-aged adults, most young adults, I think you might want to see some more credible data before you would pounce, before you would launch a vaccine campaign in them. I think mouse data is insufficient for those people. The other thing you have to factor in is that many people have had exactly the infection that this booster is targeting, the BA4-5. Millions of people have likely had BA4 or 5 over the last few months. Do they have a benefit from getting this? The current guidelines do not provide any escape hatch. There's no escape. If you were literally sick with COVID-19 and you have recovered from it and you are more than 2 months out from your last booster, the guidance would say, and I believe the CDC director is quoted as saying something like there's no wrong time to get a booster. But who in their right mind would advise a 20-year-old 1 week after recovering from Omicron BA5 to get a booster against BA5? Who in their right mind would recommend such a thing? And what evidence are you hanging your hat on? It is clear the companies have a corporate interest here. And what is that corporate interest? The corporate interest is to have a yearly shot. And the corporate interest is that a yearly shot targets all adults. And that corporate interest is no secret. They're going to make more money if they get this to be a product you have to use and reuse and reuse and reuse. Now, the second thing is, They have already achieved a set of regulatory standards on influenza where we typically allow immunogenicity data from animals to be used for human approvals. And many people say that this is just following in the influenza model. I think that cuts the other direction. Maybe we should be asking better questions about influenza. Maybe we should be running regular randomized control trials for influenza vaccines. Maybe they can get a head start by going to different parts of the world and running the study. Maybe the standard of evidence should be different for an influenza vaccine in an 85-year-old nursing home dwelling patient and a 20-year-old healthy college kid. I think, if anything, the lessons from this regulatory action actually should draw greater attention and clarity. The history of medicine has always been a history where there have been powerful people and important people, and I mean powerful by force of personality, who throughout history have pushed regulatory standards upward. 30, 40 years ago, it was easy to debut drug products based on very flimsy evidence. Maybe even prior to the 1960s, you didn't really even have to show efficacy to debut drug products. But now we have efficacy requirements. We have double-blind randomized controlled trials. We have appropriate controls. We may have active controls. We have sham controls for procedural interventions. We've had bigger sample size. We have better power calculations. We have pre-specified stopping rules. We have pre-specified looks at the data. We've improved the conduct of randomized trials and the credibility of science in a number of ways. Maybe we can do that here too, for not just this vaccine, but for other vaccines. I had a series of polls. My polls asked real-life clinical situations that people will encounter. A 25-year-old young man, maybe they're in college, maybe they graduated, they've gotten 3 doses of the Pfizer vaccine, and then they've had a recent breakthrough 1 month ago. Do you advise them to get this new booster? And the poll was actually rather negative. A 50-year-old woman, she's had, let's say, maybe 2 doses, but then she's had 2 breakthroughs. She's had 2 documented COVID-19 infections. Do you advise her to get this booster? And I think it was also rather pessimistic. Then I had a 95-year-old nursing home dwelling resident who's gotten 3 COVID-19 shots, to their knowledge has not yet had COVID-19, has some quality of life that they want to live for. Do you recommend this vaccine? And then I think it was really rather split. And I think that's the right answer, which is that maybe, the risk of the shot, all the available evidence shows that as you get older, the risks of this product are much lower. The myocarditis signal diminishes as you get older, and the potential upside is greater in somebody like that. And so I think that might be the place that you're willing to tolerate some uncertainty. But I will say, even there, it's not impossible to run a randomized controlled trial. You can do both, actually. You can run a randomized controlled trial where, as you're getting this off the assembly line, you're just randomly giving it to people and keep following them, sort of a pragmatic controlled trial design. And that information might be useful to leverage to younger age groups. And I do think that we are forgetting that transmission is it's not going to be halted by the new booster. I think that's clear. Okay, it's not going to be halted because none of the other ones did it. And this is a virus that's slippery. It's going to be able to have variant escape from the new thing too. And also, if it were going to be halted by the new booster entirely, they wouldn't be planning their yearly booster campaign. And they are planning that. Peter Marks has written that in JAMA. The goal of this vaccination is to lower the risk of severe disease and hospitalization. And they're going to continue to cite observational studies that support them in that claim. But those studies are all fundamentally flawed. They're all biased because the people who are rushing to get this are healthier at baseline. They're wealthier. They are people who are more cognizant of risks beyond this. And proof of that is in many of these observational data sets, the curves for mortality separate very, very quickly after getting the vaccine, faster than it takes effect. It takes at least 7 or 10 days before you even see a difference in getting infected with COVID-19. So how can it show a mortality benefit immediately after getting? There is the healthy vaccinee effect, which is that healthier people are more likely to be vaccinated. Very sick people are thought it's not worth it to give them a vaccine. They may not be around that much longer. Somebody who's doing poorly or deteriorating, you're not going to vaccinate that person. These are all biases in observational studies. The biases are so strong, you cannot accept observational studies. You cannot accept observational studies to conclude on efficacy. You need randomized controlled trials. It is implausible to believe that a young, healthy person is going to derive a further reduction in severe disease and hospitalization from this additional booster. That's what Paul Offit thinks. That's what I think. And that's why I think it's reckless and dangerous to approve it. And I think the rationale that we have to have a one-size-fits-all policy is really stupid. And I can't even believe that they're thinking that, because so many things So many things. The shingles vaccine, we don't vaccinate 12-year-olds for the shingles vaccine. There's so many things where there's differences in age and we treat older people differently than younger people. It's not so difficult. Most of medicine is using basic demographic data to have a different idea about someone. You can look at somebody and tell the difference between a 20-year-old man and an 80-year-old woman. As long as you can do that rather quickly in the office, you can tailor your medical therapies and your vaccine strategies differently to those two groups. I do worry that Gruber and Krause have been removed from FDA. Those were two very senior level career civil servants. They're very smart people, and they stood for something. They had principles and integrity. I'm not so sure I can say that about who's remaining. I'm not so sure I can say that about Peter Marks. Peter Marks appears to be taking his cues from the White House. He is going hand in hand with what the White House's agenda. The White House's agenda, again, like any White House, not just this White House, any White House, their agenda is not solely the betterment of the health of the American people. Their agenda is in many different ways. One, they may have corporate capture. They may be captured by companies, may even be receiving donations from companies to further political campaigns. They may have the plan to work with companies to support their bills, to get their lobbyists for the companies to support their bills. They may have the plan. So that's one thing. The next thing is the individuals who work in political processes. They often engage in a revolving door. I'm fairly confident that the commissioner of the FDA is going to go back to do pharmaceutical consulting and vice versa. Scott Gottlieb is now on the board of directors of Pfizer. He was the FDA commissioner. Steve Hahn is working for a firm that has venture capital interest in Moderna. Where will Bob Califf go? Where will Ashish Jha go? I mean, I think it's a high probability he'll be on the board of directors of a major pharmaceutical company, and very likely one in which he's had interactions with as White House czar. I hate that term, but maybe it's the right term. Sort of a power-wielding person who is really not subject to the rules that regular people are. A czar. Yeah, that might be the right term. Where will Rochelle Walensky go and consult for? These are political appointees. They have a problematic personal stake in this. And they're also not career regulators. They're not evidence-based people. None of these people were known pre-pandemic as being really rigorous thinkers when it comes to evidence-based medicine. They were known for not being that good in evidence-based medicine, frankly. You can go read, many of them have published administrative retrospective data analyses that are dubious, and if you're in that business of producing the dubious observational study, you'll be in the business of believing a dubious observational study. And then finally, the political calculus has different time horizons. A vaccine that decreases cases right before an election is much more valuable than one that actually, a vaccine policy that does greater good over the winter. They have an upcoming midterm election, and then their next horizon is the next presidential election. That's not how public health is. Public health is about the well-being of people at any moment in time. So, what can we do? I think this is something that is an extremely important issue in the history of medicine, which is that are we going to allow universities to mandate this product? I think it should certainly not be mandated. I would encourage legal forces to deny private actors the power to mandate vaccines that come to market with so much uncertainty. I don't know how we can live in a country where you allow a Wake Forest university to mandate this before they even know the data in human beings to their students, lest the students be disenrolled. I think they should be prohibited. You can't let mid-level administrators have the power to mandate. You can't have random private schools mandating it. You shouldn't have that. You shouldn't be able to have employers mandating it. The mandate for something like this, a novel platform, a novel product that has no human data, it should be absolutely unjustified. I mean, private employers can make their employees jump through hoops, but I think this is something that there needs to be either a law, a legal ruling, something prohibiting them from playing doctor. They do not have the justification that by mandating this in their population, they're benefiting other people in the organization who cannot get the vaccine because the vaccinated people will transmit too. So they don't have that rationale. They have no third-party benefit rationale. They're only doing it because they think it is, or they're only doing it, they can argue, because they think it is in your individual health benefit. But then we have to ask ourselves, are we comfortable with our employers telling us to take our blood pressure medications, screening us for cancer if they believe the cancer screening helps? By the way, read my paper in the BMJ about cancer screening from 2016. But are we comfortable with them making medical decisions for us? Can they tell me what to eat at home? Can they tell me whether or not I can have a drink of alcohol? Are they allowed that authority? And if so, I don't see philosophically a difference between them regulating my diet. If anything, my diet might have more to do with my health if I'm a 20-year-old man than whether or not I get the nth dose, which has a very marginal, if practically zero or no benefit at all on my long-term morbidity and mortality. We don't know. There's no data. But you can make a better case that getting somebody who's overweight to eat very draconian diets is better for their health, and they have the authority to tell me what to do. Otherwise, I'll be terminated. This is a dangerous place. I think it makes no sense. It's contrary to American values. Either, I don't know the legality of it, but I think it should be questioned. I think there will be a strong appetite to question any mandates. I just know it's bad medicine. Mandates should be used sparingly and only when the benefit to third parties outweighs the loss of autonomy to the individual. That is just not met. It wasn't never met, I think, with any of these vaccines. It's certainly not met with a vaccine that's only been given to 8 mice. I think the FDA is delinquent. I think they have been delinquent over the last quarter century. They are lowering the bar more and more to pharma. They are creating a system. It's actually the worst system imaginable. By not having regulatory standards of meaningful safety and efficacy, but yet having an FDA in place, you don't have a free-for-all market, which actually, by not having a free-for-all market, you limit participants in the market, so you keep the prices high, but you also don't have an efficacy standard that's meaningful, that we're actually doing things that make people better off. And so I think it's like the sweet spot for profits, but the worst thing for public health. The ACIP, they said so many things that were silly. Some speaker was saying, I just want to make it clear that COVID-19, it can be a bad disease in kids. I was like, yeah, absolutely. There can be a child who experiences a bad outcome with COVID-19. By the way, that was true about a year ago. Now we have seroprevalence data that's 75% plus. You mean to tell me going forward, you believe that COVID-19 is going to ravage young children with a weaker strain and a higher seroprevalence than you think it's going to be a bigger problem? No, it's going to be a smaller problem. The bigger problem will be you'll over-ascertain it, you'll over-diagnose it, you'll screen too much, you'll keep people out of school. But I'm not necessarily worried about kids' fate in the future. COVID-19's IFR is already below flu in those age groups, so you are fear-mongering. And you're a fearmonger on this panel, so I question why you should even be on the panel. Somebody else on the panel, they ask a question to the CDC researcher, and the CDC researcher said, well, we don't have U.S. data, but this is what Ontario says. But again, I want to say we don't have U.S. data. He should probably understand that you do know there are human beings in Ontario, and we are human beings. We're made of the same flesh and blood. And their data applies to us as well. So that was kind of a stupid thing to say. If you could learn from other countries, you might know something. It turns out in science that we read papers that come from other countries, and you can learn something. So I don't know if he knows that, but he could. And then he would do a better job than what he's doing. They ask whether or not vaccination or boosting can lower long COVID. Yeah, you're going to kind of need a definition for long COVID before you start looking into that. And I'm pretty sure you can run some lousy observational study that shows you improve some definition of long COVID. But if you want to actually do real science, you're going to need pre-registration and a whole bunch of rigorous definitions. And you need to get some meta-researchers on board. And by the way, if it appears in MMWR, you're going to want to read it twice. You need to also try to publish it in a decent journal that has a better peer review process than MMWR, which apparently is probably in my worst journal of the decade category. I mean, I don't think it gets worse than that. Those are my thoughts on this authorization. I think people who say you ought to do something with very low credibility evidence are low credibility people, and they should be treated as such. I think people who say that I definitely know for sure it's detrimental, I think they are also low credible people and should be treated as such. I think people who understand that medicine always has this continuum of potential benefits, those are greater in older, frailer, vulnerable people, and potential risks, those are probably the most salient in younger, healthier, well people who've had COVID and recovered, and that somewhere along the way, we can have different levels of evidence and different appetite for risk. But, if you have to vaccinate, it's going to be the old, frailer person based on this low credibility data. And for younger people and for most adults, I think you want to see some better data. And that's not observational data. I think you need randomized data. And I think that's the whole error in this whole process. Gruber and Krauss, maybe they made the right choice for them to resign, but sadly they made the wrong choice for the rest of us because we needed them in place to push back. I wish they would write some more op-eds because we need their voices here. I do think this is overreach by the White House, and I think it's a dangerous game. And people don't realize just how dangerous it can be. It's just the tip of the iceberg when you start getting the White House dictating what regulatory approvals are going to come through. Just the tip of the iceberg as to what might happen. and they don't see that they're playing with fire here. Well, those are my thoughts. Like, subscribe, comment, leave a message below. Check out the podcast plenary session. Check out the Substack, Vinay Prasad's Observations and Thoughts. Check out Sensible Medicine. Until next time.